Welcome to the deep dive. We are so incredibly thrilled to have you here with us today.
We really are.
Whether you are, prepping for a massive presentation at work or out for a long solitary run.
Or just trying to make sense of your daily routine.
Exactly. We're here to bring you something truly fascinating to chew on. Today we are setting our sights on a very specific, very potent window of
A
time.
very intense window.
Yes, the week of March 2nd through March 9th, 2026. We have an incredibly rich piece of source material in front of us today. It is a comprehensive sign-by-sign breakdown of the astrological weather for this exact week.
Right, and it's so detailed.
It really is. But let me be clear right up front.
Yeah.
This isn't just your standard run-of-the-mill daily horoscope that you skim over your morning coffee. There is a massive overarching theme dominating this text, a cosmic event that sets the tone for absolutely everything we are about to unpack.
It colors the entire week.
Completely. We are talking about the Virgo lunar eclipse, and the source material gives this event a very specific, highly intense title. It calls it the Great Harvest and Purification.
That's exactly right. And I want to set the framework for our deep dive today, right out of the gate, because whether you are a lifelong astrology enthusiast who meticulously tracks every single planetary movement,
Right.
or you are just insanely curious about psychological archetypes and how we as humans navigate the complex seasons of our lives, this text offers a profoundly powerful roadmap for self-reflection.
It really does.
What's fascinating here is that dual concept the source introduces right at the very top,
Yeah.
a harvest and a purification.
Yeah, those sound almost contradictory at first.
They do, but they are two very distinct yet deeply interconnected psychological and energetic processes. A harvest is fundamentally about reaping what you have sown. It is the culmination of your efforts, the moment the fruit is finally ready to be picked after months of tending to the soil. But a purification, that is a very different mechanism.
It sounds a lot harsher.
It can be. That is about clearing out the rot. It is about stripping away the dead leaves, the weeds, the invasive vines that are choking the life out of your garden.
Wow.
It is a ruthless editing process. And as we go through this text today, we're going to see how this dual energy, this act of rewarding hard work, while simultaneously cutting away what no longer serves it, how that plays out across every single facet of the human experience.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is clear. We are going to go through every single one of the 12 signs outlined in this source material. We are going to dissect the specific domains of life this eclipse is targeting, the core focus for each sign, and this is honestly my favorite part of the material. We are going to break down the specific affirmations provided in the text for each sign.
The affirmations are incredibly practical.
They really are. So as you listen, you will know exactly what themes to look out for in your own life over this week, how to interpret the sudden shifts you might experience, and most importantly, how to actively navigate them rather than just being swept away by the tide.
Being proactive instead of reactive.
Exactly. We are breaking this down into 6 distinct parts, pairing the signs together to really explore the full, incredible spectrum of this harvest and purification. We've got a lot of ground to cover. Are you ready to dive in? Let's start with part 1, the physical and the creative, focusing our lens first on Aries and Taurus.
It is the perfect place to start because these two signs really ground us in the tangible lived experience before we get into the much more abstract philosophical concepts later on in the text. Let's look at the data for Aries first.
Let's do it.
The blueprint here points out that on March 3rd, the total lunar eclipse in Virgo strikes the Aries 6th house. Now, for the listener who might not be intimately familiar with the framework of the astrological chart, the 6th house is historically the domain of daily routines, the work we do to maintain our life and the physical body itself.
The day-to-day grind, basically.
Precisely. And the source material explicitly calls this a massive reset button for daily life.
Right, and looking at this section for Aries, I have to play devil's advocate for a second here. Because the text explicitly warns about burning the candle at both ends and says the universe is demanding a pause.
Yes, it uses that exact word, demanding.
But we live in a world where grinding is sometimes the only way people can actually pay their bills. We live in a culture that absolutely glorifies the hustle, but also it's an economic reality for a lot of folks. So does the text differentiate between a necessary season of hard work and a genuinely toxic habit? Because honestly, pausing just isn't financially or logistically viable for everyone listening.
That is a highly critical distinction to make, and it cuts right to the core of what the 6th house represents. The 6th house isn't about the grand overarching career legacy. We'll get to that later with Sagittarius.
Right.
The 6th house is the mundane, the daily grind, the engine room of your life. When the source material frames this eclipse as a demand for a pause, it is essentially acting as a cosmic intervention against the specific habits that are actively degrading the machine.
Degrading the machine. I like that phrasing.
It is not necessarily saying quit your job and move to the woods. It is targeting the manner in which you are operating. When you burn the candle at both ends, you are essentially borrowing energy from your biological future to fund your immediate present.
And that bill comes due eventually.
That physiological debt always comes due. Psychologically, humans are incredibly resistant to releasing draining habits because those habits often serve a twisted kind of protective function.
Wait, protective? How is exhaustion protective?
Well, for instance, overworking can be a brilliant, albeit destructive way to avoid dealing with underlying emotional issues at home. Relying on sheer adrenaline and 4 cups of coffee can be a way to mask a deeper, more systemic exhaustion or a profound lack of fulfillment in the work itself.
Okay, so it's less about the actual labor and more about the coping mechanisms surrounding the labor. It's the difference between working a 12-hour shift and coming home to rest versus working a 12-hour shift and then doom scrolling until 3 a.m. because you're too wired and anxious to sleep.
Precisely. The purification here is the removal of the illusion of invincibility. A climax in a health matter or a work project, which the text indicates is highly likely this week for Aries, is often the external event that forces the internal realization.
The realization that you just can't keep doing it.
Exactly. The realization of I cannot sustain this operational model anymore. The text is essentially offering the reader a permission slip to finally put down the armor of constant grinding output.
I find that incredibly relieving, honestly. It's like your body finally stepping in, taking the steering wheel and saying, I'm the boss here, actually, and we are pulling over.
It's a physiological boundary being set.
And that leads us directly to the affirmation the source provides for Aries.
I honor my body as a sacred temple. I want to linger on this because it's such a specific choice of words.
It is a beautifully constructed affirmation, and it ties perfectly back to the historical context of the 6th house as the physical vessel. Think about the sociological and psychological implications of how we treat a temple versus how we treat a machine.
They are totally different paradigms, completely. If your body is just a machine, its only value is in its utility, its output, its productivity. If a machine breaks, you patch it up as quickly as possible just to get it back on the assembly line.
Tape it together and keep moving.
Right. But a temple, we don't trash a temple, we don't fill it with garbage or run it into the ground. We maintain it with reverence. We keep it clean. We respect its structural integrity. We allow it to be a place of quiet and restoration.
That's a huge psychological shift.
It is. By repeating this affirmation, the individual is actively attempting to shift their psychological framework from exploitation to veneration. It is the ultimate cognitive behavioral antidote to the burnout the text describes.
That is a profound shift in perspective. Exploitation to veneration. Wow. Okay, moving from the physical vessel of Aries, the text pivots dramatically as we look at Taurus.
Yes, a totally different energy here.
Completely.
Yeah.
The focus shifts entirely away from the daily grind and moves into joy and creative completion. The source states that the eclipse illuminates the Taurus 5th house of romance and creativity. It notes that this week brings a literal harvest moment for a project the reader has poured their heart into.
A very rewarding transit.
But before we get to the creative stuff, I want to talk about the romantic aspect, because the text zeroes in on something that I think is going to resonate with so many people. It uses a highly modern term. It says a situationship might reach a turning point.
A very loaded word.
Oh, extremely. For anyone who has somehow avoided this term, a situationship, is that agonizingly gray area in modern dating. You're more than friends, you're sleeping together, you text every day, but nobody has defined the relationship.
It's limbo.
It's an undefined, incredibly frustrating liminal space. And the text gives 2 very distinct outcomes for this week. It either becomes serious or it fades away entirely.
This is a textbook example of the purification principle at work in the 5th house.
How's it?
The 5th house is traditionally the house of play, of true romance, of the ego's joyful output. A situationship is, by definition, an unpurified dynamic. It is muddy. It is built on avoidance. It lacks the clarity required for true vulnerability.
Because everyone is hedging their bets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, if we look at the overarching architecture of this week, the Virgo energy, we have to remember that Virgo is highly analytical, deeply detail-oriented, and fundamentally concerned with what is actually useful and functional.
Right.
A prolonged situationship is, psychologically speaking, functionally useless to your long-term emotional growth.
Ouch, but true.
It keeps you suspended in a state of hypervigilance, constantly analyzing mixed signals. So this eclipse energy essentially forces the issue. It demands a definition.
But notice how the source frames that second outcome. If the situationship fades away, the text doesn't frame it as a tragic loss. It says it fades away to make room for true joy. I think that's a massive reframe for anyone listening who might be terrified of losing that connection, even if it's unfulfilling.
Yes, and that reframe is deeply rooted in modern psychological concepts, like the paradox of choice and attachment theory. When your emotional bandwidth is entirely consumed by an avoidant partner, or by the anxiety of an undefined dynamic, you literally do not have the cognitive space to experience true joy.
You're just too exhausted by the anxiety.
Exactly. The purification isn't a punishment, it is an energetic clearing. You are evicting a tenant who doesn't pay rent, so you can finally move someone in who values the property.
I love that analogy, evicting the non-paying emotional tenant. Which brings us to a huge takeaway for the listener right now. The text literally commands Taurus to stop overanalyzing your happiness. Just live it.
Easier said than done.
Oh, I have to say, reading that, it felt like a personal attack. That is so much harder than it sounds. We constantly put conditions on our joy, don't we?
We absolutely do.
We think I'll be happy when this project is perfect, or I'll be happy when this person finally commits. We put our happiness under a microscope and analyze it to death instead of just experiencing it. Why do we do that?
The modern adult mind is deeply conditioned to dissect happiness, constantly searching for the catch. We view unadulterated joy with suspicion, because it feels vulnerable.
Like waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you are just purely happy, you are unguarded, which means you can be hurt. So we use analysis as a defense mechanism. But the text provides a very specific psychological tool to combat this paralysis of analysis. Look at the affirmation provided for Taurus. I allow my inner child to lead the way.
That is so brilliant because the inner child doesn't sit around over-analyzing the structural integrity of a situationship or a creative block.
No, they don't.
The inner child just plays. They just feel. If they are having fun building a sandcastle, they aren't worrying about the return on investment of the sandcastle or what the other kids think of it. They are entirely present in the joy of creation.
It's pure presence.
By allowing the inner child to lead, you are actively bypassing that anxious, hyper-analytical adult brain that wants to control and quantify everything, and you are tapping directly back into the pure, unfiltered essence of the fifth house.
Exactly. It is a return to authentic expression. Now, it's fascinating that the text moves from this very pure expressive energy of the inner child directly into the foundational roots of where that child actually grew up.
That is a huge transition.
It transitions us beautifully into part 2 of our deep dive, Foundations and the Mind. We are moving into the complex territories of Gemini and Cancer. Let's look at the data for Gemini first.
Okay, Gemini.
The core focus here is on roots and emotional security. The source tells us the spotlight is shining intensely on the private life, with the Virgo eclipse hitting the 4th house of home and family. It lists some highly specific, deeply personal possibilities. Finalizing a major move, settling a long-standing domestic dispute, or closing a psychological chapter related to your childhood.
Now here's where it gets really interesting, and I need you to break this down for us. Because the text introduces a cosmic complication for Gemini that feels like a massive contradiction.
Mercury, please.
Yes. It says that Mercury, which the text identifies as Gemini's ruler, is currently in the sign of Pisces. And because of this, the text claims things feel foggy.
That's the word it uses, yes.
But then in the very next sentence, it contrasts that fog with what it calls the cold, hard truth brought by the eclipse. The truth being, you need a stable foundation to fly high. So for the listener who isn't fluent in the mechanics of an astrological chart, what does a ruler in another sign actually mean, and how does this create this tension between fog and cold, hard truth?
That is an excellent question. To understand the mechanics here, think of the zodiac signs as different departments in a massive corporation. In astrology, a ruling planet is essentially the CEO of that specific department.
Okay, tracking with the corporate analogy.
Mercury is the CEO of Gemini. Mercury is all about fast communication, logic, data processing, and quick wit. But right now, according to the text, that CEO has left their hyper-efficient office and taken a vacation in the watery, emotional, highly intuitive realm of Pisces.
So they're out of their element.
Completely. Pisces is ruled by dreams, illusions, and deep emotional currents. So the CEO of logic is currently trying to operate while swimming underwater. That is where the foggy feeling comes from. Your logical brain is overwhelmed by emotional static.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So you have this fog, this confusion about your roots or your family dynamic, but then the eclipse hits the fourth house like a spotlight cutting through the fog.
Precisely. Let's break down the psychological juxtaposition here. When things feel foggy in our private lives, perhaps we are profoundly confused about where we actually want to lay down roots, or we are entangled in a highly complex, unresolved emotional dynamic with a parent. Our instinct is very often to dissociate.
To just run away from it.
Right. We try to ignore the crumbling foundation at home and focus all our energy on the external world. We throw ourselves into our careers, our social lives, our outward personas. We try to fly high to escape the fog at ground level.
It's dizzier up there.
But the fourth house represents the root system of a tree. You can have the most beautiful, expansive, impressive branches in the world, but if the root system is rotting in unstable, foggy soil, the very first strong wind will topple the entire structure.
Wow. The root system. So the cold, hard truth of the eclipse is the universe coming in with a chainsaw and saying, we have to look at your roots right now.
It's an intervention.
It's a mandatory purification of the home space. If you are settling a domestic dispute, you aren't just arguing about who does the dishes, you are clearing the energetic air of the home. If you are closing a chapter related to your childhood, you are doing deep foundational inner child psychological work. You are making the soil solid again.
Yes.
But doing that work is terrifying. Facing a cold, hard truth about your own family dysfunction or your own desperate need for security can be deeply unsettling.
It is incredibly unsettling. It requires looking at the cracks in the foundation that you've spent years covering up with rugs, but it is a necessary harvest. The reward of facing that deeply uncomfortable truth is the ability to finally build upward without the constant subconscious fear of collapse.
That is so freeing.
This is why the affirmation provided for Gemini is so vital and frankly so grounding. I am safe, secure, and grounded.
I noticed how active and declarative that affirmation is. It doesn't say, I hope to be safe.
No, it doesn't leave room for doubt.
When you feel foggy, when the CEO of your brain is swimming in the emotional waters of Pisces and everything feels untethered, repeating, I am safe, secure, and grounded, acts like a psychological anchor.
It really does.
It actively combats the disorientation. It reminds the listener that they have the internal power to create their own security, even if the external circumstances like packing up boxes to move or navigating a tense conversation with a parent are completely chaotic.
Exactly. You are internalizing the foundation. You become the safe house. Now let's shift our analytical focus from the physical and emotional foundation of the home to the foundation of our intellect and our daily interactions. We are moving to Cancer.
All right, Cancer.
The focus pivots sharply to the power of the mind. The text indicates that Cancer's communication sector is being highly electrified as the eclipse falls in the third house. We are looking at potential finales in contracts, the end of intense learning phases, or finally having those difficult, long-avoided conversations with a sibling or a neighbor.
The phrase that immediately jumps out at me here, and I think it's going to hit home for a lot of people, is the mandate to clear out mental clutter.
Such an important concept right now.
Oh, totally. The third house seems to rule all the busy work of the brain. It's the texts, the unread emails, the daily chats, the Slack notifications, the little micro-anxieties that buzz around our heads like gnats all day long.
It never stops.
In our modern digital age, mental clutter isn't just an annoyance, it's an epidemic. We are constantly inundated with information.
It is an absolute epidemic. Mental clutter is the accumulation of trivialities. It is obsessing over the exact phrasing of an email you sent to your boss 3 days ago. It is replaying a minor passive-aggressive interaction with a barista on an endless loop in your head.
We all been there.
The purification happening here in the third house is the stark realization that this mental clutter is completely exhausting your cognitive resources. The human brain only has so much bandwidth. The text explicitly advises the reader to stop sweating the small details and look at the bigger picture.
Because you can't see the forest for the trees.
Right. When a major long-term contract reaches a finale or a deeply rooted communication issue with a sibling finally comes to a head and explodes, it forces a macro perspective. You are suddenly jolted out of the weeds and you realize how much precious energy you wasted agonizing over the micro-anxieties that simply do not matter.
And there is a massive warning in this section that I want everyone listening to really take to heart regardless of your sign. The text says your words have weight this week. Use them wisely.
That is a very serious directive.
Think about that in the context of your daily life. How often do we just throw words around carelessly? We vent to our friends, we gossip in the break room, we make offhand sarcastic comments online.
Usually without a second thought.
Right. But under this highly electrified third house communicative energy, the text is saying those words are landing with impact. They have weight. They are leaving dents.
The concept of words having weight implies consequence. It means your speech is not occurring in a vacuum. It is actively shaping your reality and the psychological reality of those around you.
It's building the world around you.
Think of it as a feedback loop. If you are doing the hard work of clearing out your mental clutter, you must also be highly intentional about what you're outputting. If your mind is a garden that has just been meticulously purified of weeds, you do not want to immediately start tossing garbage seeds back into it through careless, negative, or reactive speech.
That makes perfect sense. This connects so perfectly to the affirmation provided for Cancer. I speak my truth with clarity and kindness.
The nuance there is key.
I love the nuance. It doesn't say I speak my truth bluntly and aggressively, regardless of who it hurts. It pairs clarity, which is the ultimate tool to cut through the fog and the clutter, with kindness, which acknowledges the profound weight and impact of the words being spoken.
It is a very mature, elevated, evolved way of communicating.
It really is.
It requires an immense amount of emotional intelligence and self-awareness to speak a difficult truth with both absolute clarity and genuine kindness. It is the ultimate manifestation of a purified mind.
Absolutely.
And speaking of ultimate manifestations, I believe we are ready to transition into the most profound section of the text. We are moving into part 3 of our deep dive, Value and Profound Rebirth, covering the heavy-hitting energies of Leo and Virgo.
Yes. This is where the energy of the text really shifts into a higher gear. It gets incredibly real here. Let's look at the forecast for Leo first.
Okay, Leo.
The core focus is on values and material harvest. The source states that the focus shifts entirely to resources, with the lunar eclipse in Virgo hitting the second house of money and self-worth.
The second house is very tangible, but also deeply psychological.
Right. It predicts a sudden, potentially jarring shift in finances. It even gives a specific example. Maybe a current source of income ends entirely, but it does so to open the door for a more service-oriented path. Now, I have to ask, because losing a stream of income is a terrifying prospect for most people. How do we extract the psychological benefit from something so stressful?
If we connect this to the much bigger picture of the human sociological experience, the second house is incredibly complex terrain. On the surface, the mundane level, it is about material wealth. It is the literal money in your bank account, the assets you possess, the physical security you have built.
Your numbers, basically.
The numbers, yes.
Yeah.
But on a much deeper psychological level, the second house governs self-worth. How much do you fundamentally value yourself? And unfortunately, in our modern capitalist society, those two concepts, material wealth and internal value, become dangerously inextricably intertwined.
Oh, absolutely. The identity to paycheck pipeline is so real, and it is devastating. I hear this all the time from people. They tie their entire sense of self, their entire identity to their job title and their salary.
It's incredibly common.
So the internal monologue is, I am a senior vice president, therefore I am important. I make 6 figures, therefore I am a successful human being.
Exactly.
But what happens when that suddenly shifts? The text says an income source might end. If your entire identity is built on that income source, losing it isn't just a financial crisis, it is a total collapse of the ego.
It is terrifying because it feels like an absolute annihilation of the self. If you operate under the subconscious belief that your inherent value is strictly determined by what you produce for the market, then losing your mechanism of production means you mathematically possess zero value.
You feel worthless.
You become worthless in your own eyes. But look at what the text says happens next in this cosmic sequence. The ending of the income source isn't the end of the story. It actively opens a door for a more service-oriented path. And then the source material delivers what I consider to be one of the most profound, hard-hitting lessons in the entire document.
And what is that?
It says, you are learning that your value isn't just in what you do, but in who you are. This is the ultimate, most painful, and most necessary purification of the human ego.
I literally just got chills reading that line again. Your value isn't just in what you do, but in who you are. That is the true harvest here.
It is the realization of the self.
It's the profound realization of your inherent, undeniable worth, completely stripped of external validation, corporate titles, or financial metrics. If you lose your job tomorrow, you are still inherently valuable. Your kindness has value, your humor, your resilience, the unique perspective you bring to your family. Those are your true, unassailable resources.
And arriving at this realization drastically alters how an individual interacts with the material world moving forward. When your self-worth is internally secured rather than externally rented, you are no longer operating from a place of desperate scarcity.
You stop making panic moves.
Precisely. You make entirely different financial and career choices. You pursue paths like the service-oriented path the text mentions that actually align with your core identity and your true passions, rather than just endlessly chasing a paycheck simply to validate your right to exist.
And this new elevated state of being is perfectly captured in the affirmation provided for Leo. Abundance flows to me in expected and unexpected ways.
It opens up so many doors.
I really love the inclusion of unexpected ways in that affirmation. Because when you stop white-knuckling your life, when you stop clinging to one specific corporate ladder or one specific source of income as your only possible lifeline, you open your peripheral vision.
You see things you were blind to before.
You open yourself up to possibilities, collaborations, and paths you couldn't have even imagined when you were so narrowly focused on the grind. You stop trying to aggressively micromanage the universe. And speaking of the universe stepping in it's time to talk about the main event of this entire astrological week.
The centerpiece of it all.
Let's talk about the host of the party, Virgo.
Yes. The focus here is monumental. The text calls it the personal revolution. As the source states plainly, this is your moment. The total lunar eclipse on March 3rd is taking place right in Virgo's home sign, striking directly in their first house.
The text circles this massive event, but for those of us not totally fluent in the architecture of the astrological chart, what does a first house strike actually target in someone's life? Why is this such a big deal?
The first house is the absolute core. It is the house of the self. It governs your fundamental identity, your physical vitality, your outward appearance, and the initial lens through which you interact with the world. It is the I am of the chart.
Oh.
When a total lunar eclipse, which is a massive culmination point, happens in the first house, it represents a profound, undeniable rebirth. The text specifically uses the metaphor of shedding an old skin. It notes that the individual will likely feel a strong, almost overwhelming urge to change their physical appearance, their aesthetic, or their overarching life direction entirely.
I can just imagine the raw, chaotic energy of this. It's like waking up one random Tuesday morning, looking in the bathroom mirror, and suddenly realizing the person looking back at you feels like a complete stranger.
That disconnection is part of the process.
The clothes in your closet don't fit your internal vibe anymore. The career you've built doesn't ignite your passion. The entire carefully constructed structure of your life suddenly feels like a tight, suffocating shell you've drastically outgrown. But it's terrifying to actually shed it.
It is terrifying, but the metaphor of shedding an old skin is biologically apt here. Think about it. A snake doesn't shed its skin because it suddenly hates its old skin or because the old skin was bad.
Right? It just grew out of it.
It sheds it out of absolute biological necessity because it has grown too large, too complex to be contained by it anymore. If it doesn't shed the skin, it will literally die. It is a necessary, albeit highly vulnerable process of expansion.
So it's life or death in a psychological sense.
Exactly. For Virgo, having the eclipse in their own sign means the purification isn't just happening in their career or their relationships, it's happening at the very core of their being. They're not just changing what they do, they are fundamentally altering who they are in the world.
But here's a fascinating detail from the text that we have to unpack because it feels like a slight paradox. The mirror concept. The text says a partnership might be the mirror that shows you who you've become.
Yes, the mirror is crucial.
I want to know your psychological take on this. If this is a first house revolution of the self, why on earth do we need someone else, a partner, to show us who we've become? Shouldn't we just know?
It sounds paradoxical, but it points to a very profound psychological phenomenon regarding human self-perception. Often our internal evolution happens incredibly gradually. It's a millimeter of growth a day.
We don't notice the day-to-day.
Because we are with ourselves every single second, we don't fully recognize the massive magnitude of the change over time. We still view ourselves through outdated historical lenses. We still think of ourselves as the shy person or the accommodating person, even if we haven't been that person for years.
Right. We hold on to old narratives.
But our relationships, especially our intimate romantic or business partnerships, operate as highly reflective surfaces. The way a partner reacts to you, the new boundaries you suddenly push against, or the completely new dynamics that emerge in your arguments suddenly illuminate the internal changes you couldn't see.
They give you real-time feedback.
Exactly. For example, you might not realize how much more assertive and self-assured you've become until a partner actually comments on it, or until you find yourself naturally calmly shutting down a toxic dynamic you previously would have tolerated for months. The partner isn't causing your evolution. They are merely the mirror reflecting the new reality back to you.
That makes so much sense. It's like when you haven't seen a niece or nephew in a year, and you're shocked by how much they've grown, but their parents don't see it because they see them every day.
That is the perfect analogy.
And seeing that reflection of yourself can be shocking. You might look in that relational mirror and think, wow, I really am not the person I was 5 years ago. I can't keep pretending to be them just to make other people comfortable.
The discomfort of outgrowing your past.
Which is exactly why the text urges the listener to trust the release. It is deeply scary to let go of an old identity, even if it physically hurts to wear it anymore, because at least it was familiar. But the affirmation here is absolute fire. It is my favorite one in the whole document. I release who I was to become who I am.
It is a stunningly powerful, active declaration of evolution. I release who I was to become who I am.
It's so poetic.
It bridges the gap between the past and the present perfectly. It acknowledges that the old self served a valid purpose. It survived what it needed to survive, but its time has officially passed. It is the ultimate purest expression of the harvest and purification theme, harvesting the hard-earned wisdom of the past and ruthlessly purifying the identity for the future.
This is such an incredible, deep journey we are on, and it leads us perfectly right into part 4 of our analysis, internal detox and external networks, where we are focusing on the complex dynamics of Libra and Scorpio.
Two very intense energies.
Let's start with Libra, where the focus is highly introverted, spiritual detox and solitude. The source text tells us the energy is deeply internal right now. The eclipse falls in the 12th house of the subconscious and endings. It explicitly highlights therapy, meditation, and this is the heavy part, letting go of a secret or a guilt you've been carrying.
The 12th house is universally considered the most hidden, mysterious, and complex part of the astrological chart.
It's like the basement of the psyche.
It is the realm of the unseen, the deep subconscious mind, the self undoing the things we keep hidden, not just from the public, but often from ourselves. When an eclipse hits this specific sector, it is akin to turning a massive blinding stadium floodlight on in a dark, forgotten, dusty basement.
That sounds intense.
The purification happening here is a literal psychological detox of the soul. The text specifically mentioned letting go of a secret or a guilt. From a psychological standpoint, carrying a deeply held secret or harboring unaddressed chronic guilt requires an immense constant expenditure of cognitive and emotional energy.
It takes work to hide things.
It is a heavy leaden burden that you have to actively work to keep suppressed every single day of your life.
Oh, absolutely. It reminds me of that feeling when you finally delete a toxic text thread you've been agonizing over for weeks, or when you finally confess something minor you lied about. Just the physical act of releasing it is a shock to the system.
Like an instant unburdening.
It's like trying to hold a giant beach ball underwater. You might be able to use all your body weight to do it for a while, but your arms are going to get exhausted. You're going to get cold, and eventually that ball is going to burst violently to the surface anyway. The sheer relief of finally dropping that burden of letting the ball float away must be indescribable. Is that the kind of 12th house energy we're looking at here?
That is exactly the energy. It is the profound relief of ultimate surrender. And notice the text's specific, highly actionable advice on how to facilitate this deeply internal process. Silence is your best friend.
Silence. That is rare these days.
Think about how countercultural that is. We live in a world that constantly aggressively demands noise output, social media engagement, and external validation. Choosing silence, turning off the phone, sitting in a room alone, engaging in deep meditation or therapy is a radical act of self-care.
It's almost an act of rebellion.
It truly is. The source notes that Libra is preparing for a major new cycle starting later in the month. You simply cannot step into a new, expansive, vibrant cycle if your subconscious basement is hoarded with the ghosts, guilts, and secrets of the past. You have to clear the clutter first. The silence is necessary. It allows the mind to actually process the data, to grieve what needs to be grieved, and ultimately to scrub the slate clean.
That brings so much profound practical meaning to Libra's affirmation. I let go of what I cannot control. That specific phrasing is so powerful and so universally applicable.
It hits right at the core of anxiety.
Because when you really drill down into it, So much of our guilt and so much of our subconscious buzzing anxiety stems directly from a desperate, futile desire to control things that are fundamentally out of our hands. We try to control the past. We try to control other people's perceptions of us. We try to control the ultimate outcome of massively complex situations.
And we always fail.
By looking in the mirror and repeating, "I let go of what I cannot control," you are literally giving your nervous system permission to put down the weight of the world. You are finding immense psychological freedom in the act of surrender.
Exactly. It is a deeply liberating, albeit difficult realization. Now let's look at how the text beautifully contrasts that deeply internal, solitary process of Libra with the forecast for Scorpio.
Okay, let's swing that outward.
For Scorpio, the focus shifts entirely outward to networking and the future self. The text states that Scorpio's social circle is undergoing a massive purification. The Virgo eclipse hits the 11th house of friendships, community networks, and long-term dreams.
So what does this all mean in a practical day-to-day sense? The text says you might realize a group or a specific friend no longer aligns with your evolving values.
It's a very common experience.
This is something I think absolutely everyone listening has experienced at some point in their life, and it is almost always incredibly painful. You do the work, you grow your values naturally shift, and suddenly you look around at the people you've known for years, maybe since high school or college, and you realize we just don't fit anymore.
The resonance is gone.
The conversations feel painfully superficial, or you leave the hangout feeling completely energetically drained, or you realize your fundamental views on life, politics, or morality are suddenly completely at odds. But I have to challenge this a bit. Aren't we taught that loyalty is the ultimate virtue? Aren't we supposed to stick by our friends through thick and thin?
That is the exact tension the text is addressing. It is a very common, necessary developmental milestone to outgrow your environment, but it is almost always accompanied by a tremendous amount of culturally induced guilt.
Because we feel like we're betraying them.
As you said, we are socially conditioned to prize loyalty above almost everything else, even our own growth. We tell ourselves, but I've known them since we were in the dorms or we've been through so much trauma together, we fundamentally mistake shared history for current alignment.
Wow. Mistaking shared history for current alignment.
But the text provides a crucial, deeply liberating permission slip to the reader here.
Yeah.
It says it's okay to walk away.
It's okay to walk away. Hearing that validated by an external source can be like having a massive weight physically lifted off your chest. But why is it so energetically necessary to walk away? Why can't we just keep them on the periphery?
Because of the space they occupy. The text explains that by walking away, you are explicitly making room for mentors and collaborators who truly support your growth.
So it's about capacity.
This comes down to what I like to call the physics of the social sphere. It is a simple matter of capacity. You cannot pour new water into a cup that is already completely full. If your precious time, your emotional energy, and your social bandwidth are entirely consumed by maintaining relationships that constantly tether you to an old, outdated version of yourself, there is simply no logistical or energetic space for new people to enter your orbit.
That makes total sense. You're blocked.
Walking away creates a vacuum. And as we know, nature absolutely abhors a vacuum. When you deliberately, consciously clear out misaligned connections, when you purify your network, you create an energetic void that naturally and inevitably attracts individuals who vibrate at your current elevated frequency.
The people who actually match where you're going.
These are the mentors, the new collaborators, the future-oriented friends the text mentions. This is the harvest of your evolving values. You have done the hard internal work of growing. Now you are required to purify your external environment so that it actually reflects and supports that growth.
That is such a powerful, guilt-free way to frame it. You aren't abandoning people maliciously. You are simply curating your environment to match your growth, which is your ultimate responsibility to yourself. And that aligns perfectly with Scorpio's powerful affirmation. I align myself with my highest vision.
A brilliant focal point.
You aren't aligning yourself with guilt. You aren't aligning yourself with history or a sense of stagnant obligation. You are actively aligning your social world with the absolute highest possible vision of your future self.
A vision that absolutely requires the right team to realize. You cannot build a skyscraper with a team of people who only know how to build sheds.
What a great way to put it.
Which brings us beautifully and quite logically to part 5 of our deep dive, Legacy Horizons and Transformation, where we are covering the massive world-building energies of Sagittarius, Capricorn, and Aquarius. These signs are dealing with major macro-level big-picture themes. Let's start by looking at the forecast for Sagittarius, where the core focus is career and public legacy.
The big leagues.
Yes. The source says the spotlight is shining intensely on the very top of the astrological chart, illuminating the 10th house of career, public standing, and reputation.
The energy vibrating off the page here is incredibly climactic. The text talks about long-term projects finally reaching a massive climax, receiving long-awaited news about a major promotion or a fundamental shift in professional status. It explicitly says people are noticing your attention to detail.
It is a profound harvest moment.
This feels like the ultimate undeniable harvest moment. You've been putting in the grueling work in the shadows, grinding away, dotting your I's and crossing your T's, and now finally the spotlight is aggressively hitting you. But the text includes a very specific, almost stern command. Don't hide your skills. This is your time to be recognized. I have to ask, why would anyone doing all that hard work suddenly want to hide when the reward is finally offered?
That command from the text is incredibly insightful because it directly addresses a very common, deeply rooted psychological barrier. Imposter syndrome.
Ah, yes, the classic
Yes.
imposter syndrome.
We see this constantly in high achievers. Often when people are standing right on the precipice of massive success or public recognition, they experience a sudden, intense, almost paralyzing desire to shrink back into the shadows. They fear the visibility.
Because then people will expect more.
They have this internal monologue that says, if I step fully into this spotlight, if I claim this title, people will look too closely. They will realize I'm faking it. I will be exposed as a fraud. Or they fear that the new expectations will simply become too heavy to bear. They subconsciously try to hide their skills to avoid the terrifying vulnerability of being truly seen and evaluated.
I see that all the time. People constantly downplaying their own monumental achievements. You congratulate someone on a huge promotion and they immediately deflect, oh, it was really a team effort, or I honestly just got lucky with the timing.
It's an automatic defense.
But this 10th house eclipse energy is coming in and saying, no, stop deflecting, own it.
Exactly. The purification happening here in the 10th house is the complete ruthless removal of false modesty. It is about fundamentally aligning your internal perception of your abilities with the undeniable external reality of your actual accomplishments.
If the data says you're good, you're good.
If people in your industry are noticing your attention to detail, it is not a fluke. It is because your details are consistently excellent. Stepping into that recognition is not arrogance. It is an accurate, objective assessment of your value in the professional sphere. It is the necessary consolidation of your public legacy. You cannot build a legacy if you refuse to put your name on the building.
Which makes the affirmation provided for Sagittarius so incredibly potent. I am successful, respected, and purposeful.
It's very direct.
It doesn't leave any room for negotiation or doubt. It doesn't say, I hope to be successful one day or I'm trying to be respected. It is a firm, declarative statement of fact. It claims a legacy in the present tense. Now, moving from the towering professional heights of Sagittarius, let's look at the expanding horizons of Capricorn.
Yes, Capricorn is looking outward.
The focus here is exactly that, expanding the horizon. The source tells us the eclipse falls in the 9th house of higher learning, travel, and philosophy, and notes that core belief systems are undergoing a massive shift.
This is perhaps one of the most profound, deeply intellectual purifications mentioned in the entire source text. The 9th house governs our grandest philosophies, our moral and ethical frameworks, the overarching paradigms through which we attempt to make sense of the entire universe.
That's a huge domain.
The text mentions potential conclusions to drawn-out legal matters, the culmination of publishing goals, or literal long-distance journeys. These are all traditional 9th house domains that deal with the expansion of our physical or intellectual world. But the core internal realization the source highlights here is absolutely paradigm-shattering.
What does it say?
It says you are realizing that the old way of thinking simply doesn't work anymore.
That kind of realization can induce total vertigo. Imagine building your entire adult life, your relationships, your decisions around a specific rigid belief system, whether that's a strict political ideology, you inherited a dogmatic religious framework, or just a deeply ingrained personal philosophy about how capitalism or relationships are supposed to work.
It forms the basis of your reality.
And suddenly this eclipse energy strips away the fog, and you see with horrifying clarity that the framework is fundamentally flawed. It doesn't hold up to the reality of your lived experience anymore. That is a massive structural mental purification. But what happens when that collapses?
It induces a period of profound epistemological crisis. When an old way of thinking totally collapses, you are left temporarily suspended in the void without a map, You question your own judgment.
It sounds isolating.
But look closely at the solution the text actively provides. It doesn't say you have to burn your entire past to the ground and abandon every single thing you've ever learned. It says it's time to integrate your practical wisdom with a new, broader perspective.
Integrate, not destroy.
This is the harvest aspect. Capricorn energy is inherently practical, grounded, and deeply pragmatic. The text is advising the reader to take the lived experience, the hard-earned, tangible, practical wisdom they've accumulated over the years, and synthesize it with the new expanding horizon they are now seeing. You don't throw away the concrete foundation. You simply use it to build a much wider, more inclusive structure upon it.
I love that concept of integration so much. It removes the shame. It's not about admitting you were wrong or stupid in the past. It's about allowing yourself to be more expansive and informed in the present.
Exactly. It's growth, not a failure.
And the affirmation perfectly reflects that newly expansive, sponge-like mindset. I am open to the infinite wisdom of the universe. You aren't stubbornly closed off in your old defensive dogmas anymore. You are open, you are receptive, and you are ready to learn without fear.
A beautiful place to arrive at.
Now, from the expansive philosophical heights of the 9th house, we have to take a deep breath and dive into the intense dark waters of the 8th house with Aquarius.
The 8th house. Brace yourself.
The focus here is transformation and shared assets. The text absolutely does not mince words here. It says point blank Aquarius things are getting intense.
They certainly are. The 8th house is historically the most intense sector of the chart. It is the house of total transformation, ruled by the unavoidable cycles of life, death, and profound rebirth.
The heavy themes of existence.
It is the domain of shared finances, taxes, inheritances, and deep psychological soul-bearing intimacy. The text specifically points to a heavy financial debt finally being cleared, or a highly complex emotional tie reaching an absolute point of no return.
The tone of the text here is definitely heavy, almost foreboding, but it also feels incredibly necessary. It feels like the ultimate final clearing out of deadwood.
Right.
When the text says an emotional tie reaches a point of no return, it means that specific dynamic has been stretched as far as it can possibly go.
The breaking point.
The rubber band can't stretch another millimeter. It either snaps completely and breaks, or it fundamentally transforms into something entirely different.
This raises an important question, which the text itself acutely identifies as the core underlying issue.
Oh, yes. Trust.
The text states, this is fundamentally about trust. You are learning to let others in while simultaneously maintaining your boundaries. This encapsulates the great enduring paradox of deep human intimacy.
It's the tightrope walk of relationships.
How do you merge your life, your bank accounts, your physical space, or your deepest, most shameful emotional vulnerabilities with another flawed human being without entirely losing your own identity and safety in the process?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because it is so easy, so safe to just build massive impenetrable iron walls and keep everyone completely out. And conversely, it is equally easy and very common to completely dissolve all your boundaries and become completely toxically enmeshed with someone else until you don't know where you end and they begin.
Both extremes are dangerous.
Finding that razor-thin middle ground, letting them fully in while maintaining the structural integrity of your own boundary is incredibly hard, grueling psychological work.
It is the hardest work a human being can do, which is precisely why the text promises that deep healing is possible this week. Healing in the 8th house is not a superficial feel-good band-aid. It is surgical.
It's going to the root.
It is going into the deepest, oldest, most infected wounds surrounding trust, betrayal, and vulnerability and aggressively cleaning them out. Clearing a literal financial debt, finally paying off a massive loan, for example, is a tangible physical manifestation of clearing a deep energetic debt. You are squaring the ledger both materially in the real world and emotionally in your subconscious. You are freeing yourself from the bind.
And navigating that level of intense surgery requires so much faith in your own resilience, which is why the affirmation provided is so crucial. I trust the process of my own transformation. Notice it doesn't say I blindly trust the other person.
That's a key distinction.
You are fundamentally trusting your own internal ability to survive the intensity of the transformation. You are trusting that this painful purification process will ultimately result in a stronger, healthier, more integrated version of you.
And that leads us to the final piece, the puzzle.
Yes, which brings us finally to our last section, part 6, the ultimate mirror, focusing our attention entirely on Pisces.
The entire journey of this text culminates beautifully here. For Pisces, the spotlight is glaring brightly on relationships. The lunar eclipse in Virgo, the main event, falls directly across the sky into their 7th house of partnership.
The seventh house.
The text explicitly notes that committed relationships, whether they are legally binding business contracts or deep personal marriages, are reaching a major unavoidable crossroads.
The seventh house is literally directly across the zodiac wheel from the first house we discussed earlier with Virgo, right? So the Virgo eclipse in the first house was all about the revolution of the self. Pisces is looking directly across the table at the
A
other.
direct line of sight.
And the text says they are seeing the reality of your partner, for better or worse. I want to really linger on that specific word, reality.
It is a profoundly crucial word, especially when dealing with Pisces energy, which is historically and psychologically associated with idealism, romantic fantasy, and chronically wearing rose-colored glasses.
They see the potential, not the person.
The purification mechanism of a seventh house eclipse violently strips away the projection. In relationships, we so often fall madly in love with the potential of a partner, or we project our own desperate desires and savior complexes onto them, willfully ignoring who they actually demonstrably are in front of us.
We ignore the red flags.
Seeing the reality means the dense fog has finally lifted. You're forced to see their flaws, their actual daily habits, their true unvarnished character, for better or worse. The crossroads the text mentions is the critical decision you must make based on that stark reality, not on the fantasy you've been nursing in your head.
But the text offers a massive flashing red warning sign here that we cannot ignore. It points out that Mercury, the planet of communication and logic, is currently retrograde in the sign of Pisces. And because of this specific cosmic weather, the firm advice is don't rush into permanent decisions yet. Observe the patterns.
Observe the patterns.
That requires an almost superhuman level of discipline. When the fog lifts and you suddenly see a glaring, ugly reality in your relationship, the immediate visceral human instinct is to react instantly. To blow it all up, to break up, to quit the business partnership in a fiery email, or to make a grand, dramatic demand. How do we fight that instinct?
That intense urge to react is precisely why the rigorous discipline of observation is required here. A retrograde period is, by its astrological definition, inherently retrospective. It is a time designed for gathering historical data, not for executing final permanent judgments.
So you step back and collect the evidence.
When you force yourself to simply observe the patterns, you actively remove the explosive emotional volatility from the equation. You step back and act like a scientist. You watch how your partner handles stress over a week, how they communicate when they are tired, how they respect or ignore your boundaries over a period of time. You let the reality fully solidify and prove itself before you make a move.
You test the hypothesis.
This deliberate pause ensures that when you do eventually act, your action is based on deeply grounded, undeniable truth, not just a fleeting, highly reactive emotional response to the intense eclipse energy.
That is incredibly practical, highly grounded advice. Just observe the patterns, let the data roll in, be the scientist of your own life, and then, and only then, you can actually fulfill the beautiful Pisces affirmation. I create balanced and healthy connections.
Balance requires a solid foundation.
You absolutely cannot create true balance if you are constantly reacting impulsively to romantic fantasies or sudden shocking disappointments. You create lasting balance by engaging clearly and honestly with reality.
Precisely. You build on bedrock, not on sand. And that, in essence, is the grand culmination of the entire astrological architecture outlined in this source material for the week.
It really, truly is. We have been on an incredibly deep, expansive journey today, unpacking the immense complexities of the week of March 2nd through the 9th, 2026.
It's a massive week.
We've seen how this Virgo lunar eclipse, this great harvest and purification, is leaving absolutely no stone unturned in the human experience. Whether it is demanding a necessary pause in your daily physical rituals and grind, like we saw with Aries,
Or forcing you to overcome imposter syndrome and claim your career legacy like Sagittarius.
or pushing you to do the grueling, deep subconscious detox like Libra, the overarching unifying mission of the text is the exact same. It is time to finally reap the tangible rewards of the hard work you have put in, and it is time to ruthlessly, unapologetically cut away whatever is no longer serving your highest good.
It is a profound, necessary editing process of the human narrative. And as we finally wrap up this deep dive today, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought based on the recurring psychological themes we've seen woven across this entire text.
Please share.
Throughout this source material, from the internal personal revolution of Virgo to the stark relationship crossroads of Pisces, we kept seeing the recurring concept of the mirror and the absolute necessity of facing the cold, hard truth. So as you walk out into your life this week, I want you to ask yourself a deeply personal question.
What is that question?
If the universe suddenly holds up an unclouded mirror to your life right now and completely strips away all the comforting fog, all the excuses, and all the projections, are you brave enough to look directly at the reality it reflects? And more importantly, once you see that reality, are you willing to let go of whoever you were in order to finally become who you are?
Wow. What an incredibly powerful question to carry with you into the days ahead. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We know we covered a massive amount of ground today. Take these affirmations, take these psychological insights, write them down if you need to, and use them to navigate your week with profound purpose, extreme clarity, and a little bit of grace. We'll catch you next time.